That uniform looks cheap, my father sneered, swirling his expensive cognac while the rest of the family snickered around the dining table. You left our family business just to play security guard for the government? I sat there quietly in my crisp, service dress white uniform, letting them laugh. For 15 years, my father had dismissed me as the black sheep who couldn't make it in his corporate empire. He thought I was just a low-level administrator. He had no idea what those gold insignias on my shoulder actually meant. 10 minutes later, the air outside his mansion began to vibrate. Windows rattled. Dust whipped up across his pristine lawn as a military MH-60 Seahawk helicopter descended right into his backyard. My father's glass shattered on the floor. His face drained of all color as armed naval officers marched up to the patio, stopped, and saluted me. My name is Samantha Vance. I am 42 years old, and for the past 15 years, I have been the invisible daughter in a family obsessed with visible success. When I walked into my father's crystal chandelier dining room for his 70th birthday dinner, the air immediately turned cold. I had tried to keep things simple, wearing my service dress white uniform directly from the base. But in my father Arthur's eyes, anything that didn't carry a corporate logo or a multi-million-dollar price tag was a failure. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, swirling his expensive cognac while the rest of the family snickered at my expense. "Look at you, Samantha," Arthur sneered, his voice dripping with condescension as he gestured toward my uniform. 15 years away, and you show up looking like a bus driver. Is that what you traded my empire for? To wear cheap polyester and take orders from politicians? Beside him, my younger brother Julian smirked, adjusting his custom Italian watch. Julian was the golden child, the one who stayed behind to inherit the family wealth, while I was treated like the black sheep who couldn't make it in the real world. I kept my back straight and my hands resting calmly in my lap. I didn't yell. I didn't defend myself. For years, they believed I was just doing low-level administrative desk work for the government. They had no idea what those gold insignias pinned to my shoulder actually represented, or the true weight of the authority I held. The laughter around the table wasn't new. It was just the continuation of a story my father had been writing since I was 27. 15 years ago, I walked out of his corner office empire. I was tired of the shallow greed, tired of watching him measure human worth purely by a bank statement. When I told him I was joining the United States Navy, Arthur didn't just get angry, he erased me. He cut off every dime, revoked my access to family trusts, and told the entire family that I would come crawling back within a year once the real world broke me. He expected me to fail, but instead of breaking, I built a life far away from his shadow. While Julian was learning how to shuffle paperwork and hide assets in offshore accounts, I was waking up at 4 in the morning, pushing my body and mind past limits I didn't know existed. I spent years deployed overseas, managing complex logistical systems, working under extreme pressure, and earning every single rank through sweat, discipline, and absolute sacrifice. My family never called. They never asked about my deployments, never attended a single promotion ceremony, and never cared to understand what I actually did. Whenever my name came up at holiday dinners, Arthur would dismissively tell guests that his daughter was doing basic secretarial work for the military. They assumed I was sitting at a metal desk filing paperwork for peanuts. They had no concept of the classified clearance levels I had earned, or the strategic defense operations I was now responsible for overseeing. I let them believe the lie. It was easier than trying to explain a world they were too arrogant to understand. Arthur cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention as he reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a crisp, white envelope and slid it across the mahogany table to Julian, followed by a set of brass keys. "Julian," Arthur announced, his voice booming with pride, "tonight marks the day you officially take over as senior vice president of the firm. You've stayed loyal to this family, and you deserve the keys to the kingdom." Julian beamed, holding the keys up like a trophy while the rest of the table applauded. I joined in with a polite, silent clap, keeping my expression neutral. Then Arthur turned his gaze toward me. His eyes held no warmth, only a lingering irritation that I had dared to show up. He reached back into his pocket, pulled out a second piece of paper, unsealed and folded, and tossed it carelessly onto my plate, right beside my untouched dinner. "And for you, Samantha," Arthur said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Since you've spent 15 years wasting your time in that cheap uniform, I spoke to HR this morning. That's a job application for an entry-level receptionist position at our headquarters. Starting pay is $20 an hour. It's time you stop playing soldier and get a real job." Laughter erupted around the table once more. Julian shook his head in pity, while my stepmother buried a laugh behind her wine glass. I looked down at the folded paper, then glanced at the high-grade encrypted military watch on my wrist. The digital display read 1958. In exactly 2 minutes, the classified defense operation I was directing would go live. I looked up at my father, entirely unbothered, and smiled softly. "Thank you, Father, but I think I'll stick to my current position." Before Arthur could utter another sharp insult, the crystal stemware on the dining table began to hum. It started as a low, deep vibration, a rumble that felt less like sound and more like pressure pressing against our chests. The heavy chandelier above us swayed gently, sending fragments of light dancing wildly across the walls. "What in the world is that?" my stepmother gasped, setting down her glass as the windows began to rattle violently in their frames. Arthur frowned, his eyebrows pulling together in anger as the deep thrumming escalated into a deafening roar. "Is someone working on the road at this hour?" he demanded, standing up and pushing his chair back. He never got his answer. Within seconds, a massive downwash of air battered the rear of the mansion. The heavy velvet curtains whipped around the open patio doors, and outside, the floodlights revealed a tempest of dust, torn leaves, and shattered outdoor furniture. The roar resolved into the unmistakable, rhythmic chop of twin turbines. Julian scrambled up from his seat, running to the floor-to-ceiling glass doors with his phone raised, his face pale with sudden panic. "Dad, there's a military helicopter over the lawn." Arthur's prized, pristine golf course lawn was being completely pulverized. A black and gray Navy MH-60 Seahawk hovered just feet above the manicured grass before setting its landing gear firmly into the sod, sending clouds of debris slamming against the mansion's windows. The entire family froze in utter disbelief, cowering slightly from the sheer noise and force of the warship sitting in their backyard. I sat calmly in my chair, took a final sip of water, and slowly smoothed down the front of my white uniform jacket. It was time. The heavy side door of the Seahawk slid open, and 4 fully armed naval officers in tactical gear jumped out onto the ruined lawn, forming a security perimeter. Behind them stepped a tall man in a high-ranking officer's uniform, his face set in grim determination as he marched straight toward the patio doors. Arthur's shock instantly turned to outrage. Furious about his ruined lawn and ruined evening, he stormed out onto the terrace, waving his arms wildly. "What is the meaning of this?" Arthur roared, his voice cracking against the lingering whine of the helicopter's turbines. "This is private property. Do you have any idea who I am? I will have every single one of you court-martialed for landing on my—" The lead officer didn't even flinch. He didn't slow his stride, nor did he offer my father a second glance. He walked right past Arthur as if he were invisible, stepping through the shattered glass doors and into the dining room. The officer stopped dead in front of my chair, snapped his heels together, and brought his hand up into a crisp, immaculate salute. "Commander Vance," the officer announced, his voice booming through the silent room with absolute authority. The Joint Task Force needs you at the Pentagon immediately. The strategic defense operation has escalated, and Admiral Higgins requires your direct command. Arthur froze mid-sentence, his jaw dropping open. Julian dropped his phone onto the carpet, his eyes wide with horror as he stared at the officer, then at me. The entire family looked back and forth between the armed guards and the black sheep sitting at the head of the table, the daughter they had just offered an entry-level receptionist job. The room was so quiet you could hear the distant whine of the helicopter's idling engines outside. My father stood frozen in the doorway, his face completely drained of color. The arrogant, untouchable billionaire had been reduced to a bewildered old man standing in the middle of his own ruined dining room. "Commander?" Arthur stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at the gold stripes on my sleeves, then at the uniformed officer standing at attention before me. "Samantha, what is he talking about? You're just an administrative assistant." "Commander Vance leads the 3rd Fleet's Strategic Cyber Intelligence Division, sir," the officer replied coldly, turning his head just enough to address my father. "She answers directly to the Joint Chiefs, and right now, she is the most important person in this region." Julian took a trembling step forward, trying to speak. "Wait, there must be a mistake." One of the armed guards stepped into his path, placing a single gloved hand on his chest and forcing Julian back with effortless authority. "Stand down, sir." I stood up slowly from my chair, keeping my posture straight and imposing. I picked up the folded receptionist job application my father had tossed onto my plate just minutes ago. I looked at it for a moment, then set it neatly back on the table right next to Arthur's spilled glass of cognac. "Keep the application, father," I said, my voice smooth, calm, and completely unbothered. "I think Julian might need it more than I do." Without waiting for an answer, I turned on my heel and walked toward the patio doors. Arthur tried to speak, reaching out a hand, but no sound came out of his mouth. I didn't look back as I stepped out into the night and headed straight for the waiting aircraft. The rotor wash whipped against my face as I boarded the Seahawk, taking my seat while the crew secured the heavy doors. As the aircraft lifted into the night sky, I looked down through the window at my father's estate. Below, Arthur and Julian stood on the ruined lawn, tiny figures looking up in utter disbelief as the storm of dust settled around them. For 15 years, my father had measured my worth by his own narrow standards, convinced that true power was bought with money and corporate titles. In 10 short minutes, he learned that real authority isn't bought, it's earned through discipline, service, and sacrifice. By the time we reached cruising altitude, my encrypted personal phone began buzzing incessantly. Voicemail after voicemail flooded in from Arthur and Julian, desperate apologies, promises to fix things, and frantic requests to talk. I listened to the first few seconds of Arthur's trembling voice, then quietly muted the notifications and slid the phone into my pocket. I didn't need his validation anymore. I had never needed it. To anyone out there sitting at a table where your worth is questioned, remember this. Let them talk, let them doubt, and let them laugh. You don't need to argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Build your path silently in the dark, stay focused on your vision, and let your success make all the noise for you.